would like to ask about your assessment of the Greek Communist Party and its attitude towards this war. At the beginning, I would like to say that for many years I have been a great fan of this party, which is probably the only one in NATO countries that refers to the traditions of the USSR and Comrade Stalin, and at the same time has real contacts with Greek workers, which in turn makes it a party present in a Greek parliament. How is it that this party, which in the past fought against the Greek fascists supported by British American imperialism, today takes the wrong stand against the Ukrainian fascists supported by the same British American imperialism?
That's an excellent question, Comrade Michael. I mean, I'm not an expert on the history of the KKE. I have spent much time with people who are and listened, and I can only give you a very brief summation of some of the things that we should understand. But really, you know, one cannot judge a party by its past only. Of course, context is really important, but if you look at the history of the Greek Communist Party since the Greek Revolution was suppressed, it's been ideologically, it's been very up and down. So the Greek Communist Party, as all of the parties that were part of the revisionist bloc, which allied itself to the revisionist Soviet Union through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they embraced perestroika, right? You know, so the idea that this is a party which has had a revolutionary ideology non-stop since the 1920s or whatever, this is incorrect. This is not true. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Greek Communist Party, the KKE, they did eventually make an assessment of the fall of the Soviet Union, which our party welcomed. It had some very good information in it. In fact, all of that information that was good had already been published in my father's book on perestroika, which was never acknowledged by the KKE, that this really important work exists and that actually still, in all this time, no one's done anything better on the causes of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, we said, great, the KKE is making a turn away from revisionism and trying to go back to its revolutionary roots. But to be honest with you, beyond having made this official declaration and, you know, set out its stall to kind of re-embrace Stalin. Now, let's remember that, you know, Stalin was attacked by the revisionists as a veiled way of attacking Lenin. You know, they pretend in the name of Lenin they all attacked Stalin, but really they were attacking socialism. They were attacking the planned economy, right? They were attacking Marxism in practice when they attacked Stalin. And throughout that period, people like us defended Stalin because we recognize what's really under attack here, as well as the fact that Stalin's leadership, of course, and the traditions and everything that was achieved by the Soviet Union during the time of Stalin's leadership is so seminal and important, and his leadership was so brilliant and so pivotal in those achievements and have to be defended. But we understood as well what was at stake for our movement. If you demoralize the working class and tell them that Stalin did everything wrong, I mean, you know, it's not an accident that when Khrushchev made his secret speech in 1956, that was broadcast not in the Soviet Union, but around the world, something like a half of the world communist movement was demobilized in the space of a year. It was such a demoralizing effect on people because they believed Khrushchev as the leader of the Soviet Union. They believed he was a good, honest Marxist. And when he said all these terrible things about Stalin, people believed them and they were demoralized. Right? They thought they'd been following the wrong thing. And it had a huge impact from which our movement has, frankly, never recovered. Right? Not till this day. We're still trying to recover from all of that. The KKE was a party which stuck with the Soviet Union all through its revisionist period. It embraced perestroika, as I said. It was alongside all the Euro-communist parties during the 1980s, which were very destroying communism in Western Europe. It made this assessment that seemed to be a turn for the better in I think the very end of the 1990s. You might remember better than me the dates for those things. But it seems to me it's like a form and content thing. The masses are starting to realize they've been duped, they've been tricked. So you come out with a statement that says, oh, actually, we're all in favor of Comrade Stalin again. And you put Comrade Stalin's pictures on your wall, even as you continue to undermine at what Comrade Stalin stood for. What was Comrade Stalin ultimately, except a really, really good Marxist-Leninist? He always called himself, the faithful pupil of Lenin. And, that is how you can characterize what Stalin was, what he stood for, how he worked, the ideology that he represented and implemented in the USSR. It was Leninism, right? And he was a very, very good, determined, steadfast pupil of Lenin. So we've had this thing of, and we see it increasingly now, all kinds of people who like the idea of communism are now in favor of Stalin, but a Stalin where the content's taken out. They just like the picture. They like some of the iconography of socialism from the time of the Soviet Union. But the real substance of the class struggle and the class lines and the anti-imperialism that Comrade Stalin, like Comrade Lenin, represented are disappeared. For example, let me give you one example of the ways in which, the KKE is characterizing itself as a party that's against revisionism and that upholds Stalin and the Soviet Union, doesn't match up to reality. In the theory that they have elaborated to justify the positions that they're taking, which is essentially a position of saying this is an inter-imperialist war, they have redefined what imperialism is, and they've called it a pyramid. They've said, well, the whole capitalist world is in the imperialist phase. And what that means is, they say, every capitalist country is at some level of imperialism, higher or lower. And yes, they fight amongst themselves for preeminence, but essentially they're all part of this pyramid of imperialism. That's what they call it. So, and in one of the documents where the KKE was pushing this line at international seminars, and you can just imagine the type of seminar, right, where a bunch of paid international officers go and listen to each other drone on, and, they surround they pepper their contributions with Leninist phrases to reassure one another what good revolutionaries they are. And then they have a nice dinner and go home, right? At this type of conference, the KKE took some of their documents that they've written about their imperialist pyramid theory, and you can see how well they smuggled some really bad ideas into the movement in a way where nobody noticed, because very long documents that basically 90% of it says nothing, but kind of repeats Leninist phrases that kind of lull you to sleep or into a false sense of security that these are good Marxist scientists. But actually they're mostly non sequiturs. And then right in the middle, there'll be a phrase like this, it's hidden in a sentence and it's gone past without a word of explanation. In one of these documents is the phrase, the so-called national question, and they put quotes around it. Now they don't explain why Lenin and Stalin and the Bolsheviks, and in fact every communist since 1905 or whatever, conception of the national question is no longer valid. They don't say why the national question is now a so-called question. They don't explain how that's all become defunct and is no longer a question, despite the fact if you look at the world today, it's very clearly divided between, even, is it Josip Borrell talked about the golden billion? Was it him? Anyway, they have this thing. Clearly there's a divide between the countries, the small handful of countries which are looting the rest of the globe, and the position that the rest of the world finds itself in, no matter what its social system, because of the looting of its resources by the imperialist countries and the inability of so many countries to get on top of that situation, no matter how hard they try, because the military might backs up the economic might of the imperialists and comes and suppresses it. It puts down revolutions in blood. It bribes or assassinates, elected leaders, that the people, whatever method people use to try to become sovereign and independent, they find imperialism's got an answer to them. Well, the KKE hasn't explained how all of that has gone away. They say any country that has a bit of capitalism in its economy is a capitalist economy, and any capitalist economy in the modern period, because the period is imperialist, is also an imperialist economy, right? This is absolute nonsense. It doesn't help anybody understand the world. Quite the reverse. It confuses people and it demoralizes people, and it leaves the people, the communists, who should be the ones at the absolute forefront of the anti-imperialist struggle, and therefore the forefront of the anti-war, anti-NATO movement. It puts those people on the side saying, oh, this struggle is nothing to do with me, a plague on both your houses. This is a reinvention of Trotskyism, in fact.
I think that when we talk about Trotsky, that we have two periods of the career of Trotsky. The first one is before October Revolution, that he was one of the Marxist theoreticians who nobody cared what he wrote. But in the 1930s, when he was the emigrant from the Soviet Union, the biggest publishing house in the United States, France, and other imperialist countries published the books of Trotsky because he is the guy who knows the truth about Stalin. And for me, it is something very, very strange when the imperialists are inviting the Marxists to media, they print their books. They are not stupid. They are doing some reasons, and why they ignored Trotsky before October Revolution and promote them in the time when he criticized Soviet Union. It's explaining many things. But for the question of I know that the history of the Greek Communist Party and all the history of the communist parties in the Europe is very complicated, but I see big difference between the Greek Communist Party and the other parties in Europe in the time of the contre-revolution in Soviet Union. The biggest parties in Europe, like French communist parties, Italian communist party are disappeared. They changed the name, that now we are not communist, we are democratic party or something like this. And it's the most of these parties became a very, very weak party. This was the party which in the time of the after Second World War have thousands, hundreds of thousands of members, even millions members, and the popularity of the French Communist Party or Italian Communist Party after the Second World War was very, very strong. And in the time of the crash of the Soviet Union, they became very, very weak. The Greek Communist Party is a little different. That we need to admit that maybe they have some problems, but it became strong political force in Greece. And in the time in the last years, especially in the time when the economic crisis in Greece started 15 years ago, and we have all this history of the conflict between Greece and Troika, and they pushed Greece to destroy this economy and to also to that there was a lot of attacks against the working class in Greece. I think that the Greek Communist Party make a good position, that they fight against this. So it is something which now is, for me, it's shocking that I promoted this party in the past, and now I see that they are doing, they are promoting this. They are continue this NATO propaganda to attack Putin, because it's very easy living in the NATO country and writing articles that the Putin is bad. But it's if you are courageous, attack your own bourgeoisie and NATO.
I would come back a little bit on your assessment of the KKE's leadership during the time of the Troika and the referendum on the EU membership and all of those. Or, well, it wasn't on membership, was it? It was on the acceptance of the bailout package. That whole period was really one which revealed, I think, a weakness in the KK's leadership, because it did have great sway amongst the masses. It was in a position to really be very influential during that campaign. And essentially, it kind of sat on its hands and sat on the side. And as it's doing now, it did a kind of plague on both your houses. So we see already this idea, this quite Trotskyist idea, that the working class has no allies and must make no temporary agreements with any party that's not a socialist party, because you'll get your hands dirty. They justify not struggling against the EU right now by saying it makes no difference to the Greeks who they're exploited by, right? This is very Trotskyist. Now, the reality is anything that weakens the European Union is weakening imperialism, and anything that weakens imperialism is good for the struggle of workers everywhere. It might not solve our problems of exploitation today, but it's, you know, these are steps along the way to creating a situation in which we can have a successful revolution, right? When you live in the imperialist region, which unfortunately the Greeks do, you know, they live inside the European Union, and the domination of the imperialists is very strong there, and they've been able to buy social peace in many ways in many of the imperialist countries. You know, the conditions for revolution are made difficult by the way that imperialism operates at home, by the way it buys off big sections of the population, especially the leaderships of our movements, of the trade union movement, of the communist movement, of the socialist movement, the anti-imperialist movement. So say all these leaders are very often bought off. This is something that Lenin described back at the time of World War I, you know, and they're able to do that, the imperialists, because they're looting the world, and they have bringing so much wealth back home. They can use some of it to buy a little social peace and to buy off the leaderships of various movements. So the idea that engaging in any struggle that weakens imperialism is pointless because there'll still be capitalist exploitation at the end of it is a profoundly un-Leninist point of view. But essentially, that is the position that the KKE takes in regards to the European Union. On the other hand, you know, they say, oh, look at us, we're the most active party against the war in the EU. And they sort of back this up by showing you every now and again a photo of a few of their members throwing paint at a tank or something else like that that's happening in NATO. Okay, they've organised a few protests in Greece against NATO. They've equally organised protests against the Russian embassy, and they claim that as a good Leninist, you know, we're opposing both sides. But the truth is, Russia is a NATO member. The KKE is a mass party. A mass party. It's not a party like my party that has almost no connection with the masses. We're always being rebuked for that. How dare you speak to us about anything when you're so small and you've got no history of achieving anything? Well, okay, you know, it's true. We're a small party, but we try to understand Leninism and tell the truth to people so that we can lay the foundations, such as they are, for the better conditions in Britain and help workers understand the enemy they're facing. KKE, on the other hand, has a mass base. It has influence amongst the working class, has ability to speak to people, and, you know, a huge media network and all the rest of it. How is it really? It says it opposes NATO. Okay. Is the most a party like that can do against its own country's activities in this war, is the most they can do to organise a couple of protests and throw some paint at some tanks? I don't think so. Where's their campaign of mass non-cooperation? Where is it that they're physically stopping those tanks from getting over the border? Where is it that they're disrupting the activities of the NATO bases, using their seats in Parliament to call on the country to refuse to move any material, the whole country? Where are they calling in the trade union movement to stop all cooperation with every aspect of the war? The Greeks could do a huge amount if they had that kind of leadership. They don't have it. The idea that the KKE opposes NATO is purely tokenistic. Their main work is opposing Russia. They're pushing the propaganda. They're organising demonstrations outside the Russian embassy in Greece. How is Russia the enemy of the Greek people? You know, that's insanity.